Welcome back. Tonight, a California church is fighting back against a cease and desist order. Harvest Rock Church in Pasadena is requesting a preliminary injunction against California Governor Gavin Newsom over his COVID-19 orders, which church attorneys call unconstitutional. On Sunday, Harvest Rock Church joined other California houses of worship, violating Golden State restrictions on singing, chanting, and indoor attendance. Another church defying those state orders, Grace Community Church near Los Angeles. And joining us now, the Reverend John MacArthur, pastor of Grace Community Church in Sun Valley near LA. Pastor MacArthur, welcome to Faith Nation. Pastor, first off, you called the Sunday worship service a peaceful protest. Were you drawing a comparison to what appears to be a loophole, presumably since outdoor peaceful protests are allowed?
Yeah, that's the obvious reality here in California, as it is all the way across the country. Nobody wants to shut down a protest. May start out peaceful, could easily turn into a riot. In fact, last week here in LA, there were protests 5 days in a row. Nobody seemed to care whether anybody kept social distance or whether they wore masks. The rules don't apply to them, but they apply to a church. And so if we can call ourselves a protest, we should. We're the original protesters. We're Protestants. We've been doing this for 500 years. So that was a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek way of saying, if they can meet without any repercussions, why can't we?
And why do you think that distinction has been drawn?
Well, I think because the culture, the climate is to allow protest, even to foment protest. I think there are people in power in our country who are behind protests. I think they don't even mind, obviously, when those protests turn into riots, damage is done. You see across our country that there's an unwillingness to stop this in many of our cities. So there's an agenda going on to allow this kind of disruption, to tear down institutions that people hate and detest. And reality would tell us this, that the world is hostile against the Church of Jesus Christ, particularly those that are faithful in proclaiming his gospel. Jesus said, if they hated me, they'll hate you. That's just how it is. And obviously, we've had a couple hundred years of a good relationship with the government, but it's not surprising, given the climate today, that they're beginning to turn even on faithful churches.
Pastor, I want to ask you, most Christians would agree that churches are essential, but they've also been characterized as super spreader venues. Pastor, how much should churches and church leaders like yourself comply with the government to play a part in bringing California's recent surge to heel?
Well, I think the obvious way to answer that is to say that when the first initial model came out and we were told that millions were going to die, we did what any common sense people would do. We shut down the church, and I preached live stream to an empty auditorium. I did that for weeks, and eventually the people started coming back. We didn't invite them. We didn't tell them to do that. They began to realize that the predictions were way off. In fact, as of now, we've had about 10,000 deaths in California out of 40 million people. So you have a 99.98 chance that you're going to survive this just fine. The people get that. They understand that. They're moving around in our culture. The freeways are busy again. People are moving around and they're connecting with each other. They're just starting to come back to normal life. So far, we don't have anybody in our church, and we had 7,000 people here last Sunday that we know of who is sick. I haven't seen or heard of anybody in our church in the hospital. So they just don't believe the narrative. We are not going to do something that's dangerous to our people or any others. But at the same time, our folks and many, many other people whose churches are closed are deciding to come to Grace Church. And that's an adult decision that they make, weighing the realities that they know are true.
Pastor, we only have about a minute left. If you can, I understand the city issued a cease and desist order and threatened the church with a daily $1,000 fine and possible arrest. Can you explain why you believe it's important to take this stand? What's at stake here?
Well, what's at stake, first of all, is the reality that Christ is the head of the church. Is this anything new? Don't we as believers make heroes out of people who stood against tyrants throughout church history? This started in the book of Acts when they told the apostles not to preach. And the apostles said, you judge whether we obey God or men. That should be obvious to you. So this is nothing new for the church. It's new in our country. Faithful churches, faithful pastors have always realized Jesus Christ is Lord and head of his church. We follow him. Wonderfully, the Constitution allows us that privilege and demands that our leaders protect that privilege.
All right, Grace Community Church's John MacArthur. Pastor MacArthur, thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure.